I'm not really a big fan of holidays. Ever since I was a kid, everyone around me had these huge expectations on what they wanted their holiday to look like. It created an ungodly amount of pressure to perform for the delight of others and to soothe them when their childish desires were not met. It is exhausting, and I've only realized how much it has impacted my life in the last couple of years during quarantine because of all the time I've had for self-reflection and a bit of TikTok therapy too. I share this with you as a cautionary tale about keeping your expectations low, because on this episode on Shaping Fire, I'm the special guest. Today on Shaping Fire, we are sharing my recent appearance as guest on the Curious About Cannabis podcast. The show's host, Jason Wilson, is absolutely delightful, and we share a similar vibe. The interview covers my thoughts on using outdoor regenerative cultivation techniques indoors, the rocky transition from medical to recreational markets for cannabis patients at the state level, how to form local growers collectives, and how I formed the one here on Vashon Island, the rise of autoflowers, of course, and some behind-the-scenes thoughts about Shaping Fire, the podcast, among other topics. It's a whole lot of good stuff in there. And jokes about the holidays and low expectations aside, I'm sharing this interview because I'm actually proud of what Jason and I produced. I certainly don't share all the podcasts where I appear, but this one is especially well done, and I think you might enjoy it. For those of you who prefer video, you can watch the Curious About Cannabis video recording of this interview today on the Shaping Fire YouTube channel. I do want to note that I get the sniffles at one point, and for those of you not watching the video, I'm actually recording my side of the video outside on my deck, and it was pretty chilly that morning, and I got the sniffles. So I hope you have a delightfully tolerable holiday weekend by yourself or with loved ones, and enjoy this, episode 66 of Curious About Cannabis, hosted by Jason Wilson, with special guest, me, Shango Los.
Hey everybody, this is Jason with Curious About Cannabis. Thanks so much for tuning in once again. Today I am really excited because we've got kind of a convergence of cannabis podcasts here, but I'm connecting with somebody who I've been told repeatedly by guest after guest that I've interviewed that this is a person I need to connect with. I've been told that a lot of the people that I interview that I remind them of this person, so we finally made it happen. I'm here with Shango Los of the Shaping Fire podcast. Shango, thanks so much for being willing to take the time today to connect and come on the podcast.
Hey, Jason. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. And, you know, right off the top, I want to say thank you for the work that you do, because as you know, a scientist in this field and kind of crawling out of my cave into media and trying to connect with the outside world, you know, I definitely have recognized that your work has been some of the best that I've come across in terms of trying to connect lay people with technical information in a digestible way that's relevant. So my hat's off to you, man. Thanks so much for the great work that you've been doing so far.
Well, thank you very much. I really put my heart into it. I'm always doing my best, and I really enjoy it as well.
Yeah.
And now that the show has grown, you know, that we're in our 4th year now of Shaping Fire, it's gotten to the point where it can support me now. So that is nice. It was a lot of years of doing multiple jobs, but I'm at the point now that I can really focus on the show, and you know, I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
That's so awesome and hopeful for me to hear, because I'm only, you know, we're just past like a year and a half or so of Curious About Cannabis running. And so I'm in that period right now of working like multiple jobs, balancing this too, and trying to make it all happen. So I can totally relate to that hustle. And I know that a lot of my listeners, because they've told me, a lot of my listeners do already listen to Shaping Fire, but to those that are unfamiliar or don't know who you are, do you mind providing just a little bit of background into, you know, first what Shaping Fire is, and then I want to work backwards and just talk about kind of your relationship with cannabis and your general story.
All right, well then I guess I'll just start with talking a little bit about Shaping Fire, and then you can lead me wherever you want to lead me after that. So Shaping Fire is a audio-only podcast that focuses on cannabis health, cultivation, and solventless extraction techniques. And so it is in the early days, for the first year, I was focused to a great deal on cannabis business, but over time, not only were there a lot of other people covering cannabis business, but I realized that after medical cannabis went away in my state of Washington, and my national clients in medical started converting to rec, that the vibe changed in the scene.
Yeah.
And I wasn't as excited about covering business anymore. I was really much more interested in cannabis patients, different cultivars, how working with them in different preparations helps human health. And then after I learned how to make ice hash, and then once ice hash rosin came on the scene, I realized that most of us can do all the things that we need for cannabis at home without even interfacing with the licensed market. And while I wish the licensed market success, so I've got lots of friends in the licensed market, I found that wasn't the part that I was most excited about. The part I was excited about was small cannabis communities, home grow, and people trading cannabis, so they had greater variety. So that's essentially what Shaping Fire covers now. We have got some of the best guests in the whole world available to us. We're pulling in botanists, scientists from the lab, folks who are neurologists. Also cannabis breeders, a master hash maker sounds like
right, yeah.
But folks are very talented and experienced with making hash, and so I bring them on the show, and we talk a lot of specifics. The idea of the show was always to give people enough information to be able to take action. It frustrates me when I listen to a podcast that is supposed to be teaching me, but it leaves all these big gaps. And so I really do my best to provide content that gives people a nice full package so that they can either make decisions or do the technique or understand their health better in one nice, tight 90-minute package. And so that's the nature of the show. And I like to say that Shaping Fire, with Shaping Fire, you get educated while we respect your time, right?
Yeah.
I don't spend a lot of time I don't get high on the show. I don't talk about my guests talk to my guests about what cultivars they're smoking. Like there's different shows that do that,
Right.
and that's cool, and it draws a kind of audience that wants that kind of I don't know, bro vibe, right?
Yeah, like hanging out.
Yeah, totally. And they'll do these long shows, but the kinds of folks who tend to listen to Shaping Fire tend to be, cannabis enthusiasts who also have got other things they've got to get done. Maybe they run companies, maybe they are, maybe they're decision makers, or they're just like people who are busy.
Yeah.
And so I try not to waste folks' time. I try to get to the point, get people the information that they're going to need on whatever the topic, and then end the show in a cheerful way.
Absolutely. Well, and that's something I really respect, because that's been a big part of my approach too. And part of that comes from just like my analytical thinking as a scientist. But I'm like, yeah, I don't get high on the show. It's really just what's the core piece of information that's interesting and making that digestible. And I noticed that in your marketing, that we're trying not to waste your time. And I love that. And I also appreciate what you just said about watching this transition and the vibe change from as things switched from medical to rec, because I definitely experienced the same thing here in Oregon. I was involved in the medical program. I was a medical patient and also working, building this lab to try to help people understand what was in their products. And we were dealing mostly with patients, a lot of medical patients that were growing their own cannabis, making their own products, and wanting to understand whether they were safe to consume and what the potency was and that sort of thing. And then you do see this shift, and now all of it is just so different. And it's hard, I think, for some people to appreciate just how substantially things have changed if they weren't involved in the medical systems before everything started to come online, especially in other states that are taking a little longer to make some of these changes to their laws. So can you speak to that a little bit, just to expand a little bit more on your perspective on just exactly how things changed from kind of the early medical days into the legal systems that we have now. What were some of those changes you started to pick up on?
Sure. I've got three that I think are probably good to hit on. The first one is we've already hit on a little bit, which is the players changed. Who was involved during the medical days? There were more heritage cultivators and heritage medicine bearers who were involved, who were not. They were fringe folks because there was a lot to lose back in the medical days too, when there were still being raids and things, and the laws were changing, and so many people were working in the gray market that most of us had some of the people in law enforcement who were supporting our ability to create medicine and put it in the hands of cannabis patients, but there were other folks in law enforcement who were not ascribing to that, and so it made it very risky. And once it became more safe for capital, and licensing started to happen, the capital came, and with that comes a different kind of risk assessment and different bureaucracy for the players. And a lot of the heritage cultivators, they didn't have the credit score to rent a legal location, or they didn't have the business acumen because at their heart they were farmers, right? Or alchemists, how they saw themselves, not really as business people. And the people who were organized and did have capital to be able to rent legal places and go through the state bureaucracy and end up getting the licenses and know how to hire out for HR and know how to sell to investors, those are a different kind of person. And again, I don't intend, and it's not my goal here to diss those folks, because I think that increased access in every state is important, and access is a priority. However, it very much changed from we're in it for the patients, and I've been around cannabis for years, and we're trying to do our best by the patients, into being something that has more neon lights and finer packaging, and the vibe changed. And so that was a significant difference. The second thing I will point out is that the varieties of products change. Now, certainly, now that we're many more years in to legalization or at least licensing in some states, there are beginning to be more patient-focused products. But just about every state that has medical first and then they go rec, there is this sudden dearth of medical products when the licenses come out, because licensed folks know that the things that are always a reliable sell are high THC flower. And so that's what everybody starts with, and I had plenty of clients who were making this transition. They're like, all right, start with the high THC flower. Once we get that established, then we're going to roll out these other products. Well, for patients who had gotten off their pharmaceuticals, that gap could literally kill them. Either because they had to go back to pharmaceuticals and they were dealing with those side effects, or they had gotten to a point where their body had healed enough in certain ways that they couldn't go back to those same pharmaceuticals without it being a bumpy ride of getting your body back attuned to a pharmaceutical solution instead of an herbal solution. And so a perfect example for that is full extract cannabis oil. So an ethanol extract, most of us know it as RSO. So RSO usually disappears from the market during the transition from medical to recreational. And then when it does start to show up in the rec market, you'll find companies who are like selling their CO2 RSO, right? Which is not, it's not the same thing, right? Because it's more economical for them to run it, through a CO2 machine than it is for them to do the more often laborious ethanol extraction. And so there's this variety of products are gone. However, with the legal market, some really cool things have come about, like really great dispensers
Yeah.
for RSO, and some of the inhalers are pretty incredible. Certainly, the advancement of vaporizers has just wildly expanded. So there's been a lot of things that have come with the licensed market too, but I think that's more to do with the idea that it's easier for these cannabis companies to get funding now for their novel products,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
medical is capital, right? And so it was a lot harder for those companies. And my third example also involves RSO, the full extract oil. Back in the day, if you needed RSO because you were sick, you could go to at least on the West Coast, you could go to some kind of patient cannabis exchange of some sort, right?
Yeah.
And they were often straddling the gray market, and they're often kind of straddling legality, but the heart was there and the quality was there often.
Yeah.
And the people were smiling, and there were lots of hugs, and it felt like a family thing. And depending on where you were regionally, you could get a 1 milliliter syringe of high quality RSO for between $15 and $60, $15 or $50, depending on where you were. And here is the example part, is that just about everybody I knew who made RSO had a discount for people who were doing a 60 milliliters in 90 days cannabis protocol, right?
Yeah.
Because if you had cancer and you had found yourself, gonna try RSO, you're either already kind of like an herbally minded person,
Yeah.
or you were already broke because the Western system had already taken all your money. The doctors had already taken them all.
Yeah.
And so you were at your last bet, and you were going to try cannabis, right? So usually, the people who had cancer and were ready to try RSO were already broke. And we all felt bad for them because they had cancer, right?
Yeah.
This terrible thing to have to deal with. And so you'd get people who would give somebody a huge reduction, say if they were selling their syringes for $50 normally, they would, if you're going to buy 60, we'll drop the price down to $25, right? We'll do it half price. And sure, some of that is like you're buying in volume, right? Everybody, volume discounts are good, but really it was more than that. There was a lot of heart in that price, and the licensed market is not able to do that kind of price reduction. Yep. And so, there is not bulk purchasing really in the licensed market. If you need multiple syringes of RSO, you buy one for $72 and another for $72 and then another for $72. And so people who need cannabis to live, it has become harder for them to purchase at reasonable prices in the rec market, which of course is keeping the alternative unlicensed market very much alive throughout the country. And the rocky transition from the medical markets in most states to the rec markets, it's kind of done bad for both. It was bad for the medical heritage processors. It's also bad for the patients, and also because this black market is still being kept alive because it's so needed. It's also bad for rec. So mostly, the state's mismanagement of these transitions from medical to licensed recreational has just given us a worse of all options.
Yeah, everything that you just brought up, it brings out a lot of memories for me thinking about Oregon and the transitions that we saw, going from medical to recreational. And one thing that I think about from a patient perspective, particularly when you talk about the reduction in the diversity of products, I remember how much experimentation was going on with CBD THC ratios leading up to 2016 or so. And obviously it's still happening. But in the medical system, if I went to somebody and said I was looking for a certain ratio, or once dispensaries became legal, because for a while they were kind of in this weird gray area.
Yes, they were.
Yeah. Once they became officially legal, you could find 4-to-1s, 3-to-1s, 2-to-1s, 1-to-1s. Like, you could find all of these things. There wouldn't be a lot of them, but they were solid. And for me, I have these spinal cord injuries, and I found, like a 2-to-1 to 4-to-1 is very nice for that. I noticed that when things went recreational, you really don't see a lot of that anymore. You might see some 1-to-1s, but that's most of what you see. And it's either high THC, high CBD is now kind of getting relegated to hemp, but you still see that in dispensaries from time to time. But that's it. And so for someone like myself that is a medical patient that no longer has a card because it's now legal, that was a big change. And so I definitely have seen a lot of those same changes too. And hearing you talk about it, it's obvious you have a lot of passion for the patients and a lot of passion for that, like you were saying, the kind of source where all of this, is really coming from. So to kind of rewind quite a bit, do you mind sharing how did your relationship with cannabis get started? Is it something that goes back into, teenage or early 20s for you, or is it something that you discovered later? How did that relationship come about?
I would say I had two beginnings of my relationship with cannabis, because the first time was my freshman year of college. I went home. He lived in New York. He went home for Christmas, and he came back and he brought some joints. And I had never had access before, and had never seen it around or anything. It just wasn't where I lived in the, suburbs, Catholic school, that whole thing. And he brought it back, and I, for whatever reason, I was immediately interested. There was no second thought. He's like, "Oh, you want to try this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, let's try new things."
Yes.
And so we tried it, and I immediately thought it was great from an experiential, point of view, both recreationally because it was fun, but also I immediately got the idea of the mind expansion part of it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh wow, it really shifts my perspective in ways I can consider my mundane life in new, fresh ways. So I thought that was really cool. And it took me about 4 weeks to get my first bag after that, and then I don't think I've been without it ever since 1990 now or whatever. One of the funny things is I learned how to smoke cannabis during the first season of The Simpsons.
Oh
And
man,
so,
wow.
That goes way back. We used to all get together on, I don't know if it was Tuesday or Thursday nights, but we'd all get together and sit on the floor of the dorm room and all smoke and watch that first season of Simpsons. And that's how I was smoking with friends all the time. And I'm like, I think I need to get some of this for myself. So then we've got like a lifetime of being somebody who enjoys cannabis myself. But then 2011 came, and I was in a car accident. I suffered dual concussion, resulting in a traumatic brain injury. And the neurologist actually told me off the record, he says, I recommend that you, consider using mushrooms to help rebuild your neural net and just kind of soothe the overactivity that I was getting, the overstimulation. Yep. And he says, I also recommend that you move out of the city. And so I moved out to Vashon Island, where I live now. And he also said, I understand that there's some, healing properties in cannabis. He says, I can't recommend any of this for you officially. He says, but if you're, look into this stuff. And I was astonished, right? Because, back in those days, 2011, you still didn't tell your doctor
right
cannabis. And I was a daily cannabis user at that point. And so I'm like, medicine, huh? Oh, all right. And so I started looking into it and started, reading the early research, mostly coming out of Europe and everything. I'm like, wow, there really are medicinal properties going on here. And then my dad got really bad knees. And so I had already learned how to make a cannabis tincture for myself to help keep my my nervous system calm and that I wouldn't get overstimulated. But then my dad, knees got really bad, and the pharmaceuticals he was using for anti-inflammation really had some bad side effects. And so I said, hey, I bet you I could put my tincture in some like body lotion or hand cream or something and whip them together and boom, topical, right? And so I tried it and it worked. And my dad put it on his knees and he's all like, oh my gosh, this works so much better and for so much longer than this like ugly pharmaceutical that he was on. And I don't mean to diss all pharmaceuticals, right?
Sure.
There are appropriate pharmaceuticals at appropriate times. But in this case, an herbal remedy was much better for my dad, and he was very enthusiastic about it, and that made me feel good about it as well because, you know, my parents were historically discouraging me from cannabis or, you know, like drugs in general, right?
Sure, yeah.
Parents, and but at this point I'm like, wait a minute, there's something here. This is helping me soothe my brain injury and heal, and now it's helping my dad too. What else is going on? And so I dove into both like learning about cannabis medicine from, you know, any sources I could, and also trying to learn herbal preparations. I live here in Seattle. I live pretty close to Bastyr University. So my whole area is just like dripping with herbalists. They're everywhere. And so, you know, if you're nice to them, they will tell you their secrets. And that's when I got my rebirth into cannabis medicine in 2011. And then of course, you know, things have continued since then.
Yeah. And how did that, I mean, first of all, I want to say, I get why people wanted us to talk because, in some ways we have some big parallels between the two of us. Cause, I went through a similar experience with my mom. So after I had all these spinal cord injuries and trying to figure out how to get control over, you know, myself and the things that I was dealing with, I had been a regular cannabis user, just like you had described, and then, you know, kind of discovered this new perspective of looking at it. And then my mom had really bad fibromyalgia and, you know, arthritis and stuff. And very similarly, I gave her some extract that we mixed with a like a coconut oil based topical that I can't remember what it was. Just really simple. Just mixed it in there. And likewise, she was like, oh my gosh, this is better than any pharmaceutical I've ever taken for, you know, for these problems. So it's funny, those parallels I can totally relate to. And how did, so you start to understand how cannabis is affecting you and helping you find this kind of new balance that you need in your life. And then that's bleeding out into loved ones and seeing the effects that cannabis can have on them. When did your passion for education start to really manifest, where you really started to move forward in sharing all of these things that you were learning with other people? Because you've been doing, I mean, beyond the podcast, you've organized all sorts of events on Vashon Island and other things like that. And I definitely want to talk about the work that you've done to really bring the community together to learn and share knowledge and everything. So what were how did those seeds, I guess, get germinated, if you will, to bloom into a lot of the education?
I see where you're going.
Yeah.
So the way the timeline went out is hit my head in 2011, started making my own preparations, and you know, when you're making tincture and it's working for you, and people, your friends and loved ones, find out you're making it, suddenly they're using your tinctures. And then their loved ones are using your tinctures, and then medical got going more significantly in Washington, or at least my participation of it was increased, and my tinctures being sold through the Washington medical market.
Nice.
And it was great. I was able to make these tinctures and share them through legal dispensaries. And it was at that point that people started asking me questions, because at that point they're all like, okay, which of the four tinctures do I want? Why do I
Mm-hmm.
want them? Which cultivar, what preparation is going to help me now versus something in high CBD that is designed to strengthen your endocannabinoid system and will help me long term. And that was when I first got into thinking about and teaching dosing strategies to patients. And so I loved that. I really enjoyed that. And the medical days were a heyday, right? Not only because everybody was so not everybody, but the vast majority of people were very nice. But also the margins weren't as tight as they
Yeah.
are today.
Yeah.
And so, you could actually do this and support yourself. And while I never got to that level, right? The market transitioned
Yeah. Yeah.
to legal before, I had like a business, right? My volume was never of units was never significant, but people liked it, right?
Yeah.
People, and that buoyed me, and I started teaching. So then, when there was the when the market started to well, before we talk about the market pivoting, it was at this same time that I began reaching out to the underground cannabis growers on Vashon, because Vashon has been known for its high quality cannabis all the way back
Yeah.
to the 70s.
Yeah.
Bands would come through Seattle and they'd try to like get their Vashon hookup, and
Yes.
they'd pick up some weed for the rest of tour and all that kind of stuff. And so I knew that these cultivators were here on Vashon, but I also knew they were very much still in the underground.
Mm-hmm.
And but because there were so many people producing on the island, prices for ounces on the island were just like ridiculously low, and that was great if you lived on the island, but it was really bad for the cultivators who were trying to support their families on it. And I realized that there were all these dispensaries a short ferry ride away in Seattle that would love to have the produce from my island. But none of the cultivators wanted to leave the island. I didn't want to. I still don't want to leave
Right,
the island.
yeah.
Once you moved here, you're like I don't want to go to Babylon.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I don't want to go to that. It's noisy and everybody's driving crazy and
Everything's good here. We'll just stay in place.
Yeah. But because I was more recently on the island than these cultivators who grew up here, I wrote a one-page invitation talking a little bit about this group that I wanted to form on Vashon called Vimeo, which stands for the Vashon Island Marijuana Entrepreneurs Alliance. And I wanted to know what they wanted as far as representation. Like what can you use as a cultivator? What would help you in the underground? And so I made up a bunch of these letters, and I started giving them out to the kinds of people on the island who I thought would know cultivators. So particular types of farmers, certain types of community organizers. I'm like, you don't have to tell me if you know a cultivator, but if you know a cultivator, would you give them this letter? And they're like, huh, that's interesting. Yeah. And so these letters went into the underground. I made like 25 of them. And these black market cultivators started like showing up at the oddest of times too, because nobody was calling me. I would just be, at a baseball game or a softball game, and somebody would come up to me and say like, you're Shango, right? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, hey, I got your letter.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh.
Wow.
And they're like, you want to go for a little walk? And I'm like, yes. And so we'd go and we'd talk, and the universally everybody wanted security. Right? Yep. Everybody was afraid to get busted for their grows. And so I knew that normalization on the island was one of the important things that Vimeo was going to do. And then the other thing is that everybody was spending way too much money on inputs.
Yeah.
All these fancy ass inputs are expensive. And so the very first thing I did when I formed Vimeo was to start essentially a media / I guess propaganda campaign that was pro cultivator. And things like we back in those days we were using words like pot and marijuana a lot more than we were now, right? So we would do things, we would put out things like, hug your local pot grower, pot growers are local farmers too.
Yes. Yeah.
Pot cultivation is a family farm. Things like this, right? Which got the rest of the island to realize that you don't have to look at cannabis as a scourge.
Hmm.
These are members of the community, and we should embrace them. And then the second thing I did is I started pulling together more of these cultivators, and I said, this is still in the old days when people were throwing away their soil after every run, right?
Yeah.
Instead of keeping it and aging the soil and, more of a no-till kind of regen thing, right? Back in these days, people were just dumping their soil and thought they had to start with new soil. Which, so we started bulk purchasing soil. And just having, a higher quality soil than was available generally on the island. And we were just having it come and be dumped at one location, and everybody would come with their truck and fill up their truck and then head on home. And, we got these hugely better prices. Well, after that, people were all like, all right, Shango, what else you got for us, And so we started doing, some other, soil amendments. We started buying bulk, and, this was well ahead of my awareness of the more serious regenerative scene, which I'm, a big part of now. But in these early days, I knew I liked organic farming because I grew a little bit of organic food. But I certainly didn't have like the regenerative whole mindset. I was just very stoked that we were using natural amendments, and I knew how to make compost tea.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's good. Just the idea was just like, let's try to like get people off the bottle.
Yes.
Because that was a thing that early. And so we started doing that, and people really liked that. Well, at this point, the underground growers started to trust me more, and I'm learning a whole lot about what it means to be a cultivator, because I was not a cultivator. I was an enthusiast, and then a patient, and then and so I started going to some of these folks that we had a more trusting relationship, and I said, hey, can I shop some of your flower into Seattle? And they're all like, you want me to like front it to you? And I'm like, well, I guess in a way, but I just want to borrow it for 2 hours, 3 hours. Can I have, a couple pounds, and I'll go over to the dispensaries and try to sell it. And either I will bring you back money, or I will bring you back the flower. I'm not it will not be in my hands tonight, one way or another. And they're like, all right, let's give this a try. And I took it over there, and I came back with money. And so when I got them about 150% of the price that they would normally get on the island.
Nice.
That made me very popular.
Yes.
And so they're like, wait, you're saving us money on the inputs, and you're bringing us home more money and setting up these relationships. And then eventually, once they got set up, the cannabis was finding its way off the island, which honestly was making the concerned people a little happier, because I was a public figure. Since I wasn't a cultivator, I could be out front more. And so I was out front saying nice things about cannabis farmers, explaining their needs, and explaining that this organization I had started was helping filter a lot of this cannabis off the island, which caused them to embrace my new organization a little bit more. But the farmers were also thrilled, and because they were able to get more for their product. So this all happens, but then everything falls apart at the end of medical. So we got together as Vimeo, as a group, a few times to go through the regulations when it came out, like the how to apply for a license. I went and I read it all, and I marked it all up, and then got together all these people who are interested in getting licenses, and essentially taught the regulations to everybody. And the more, we met 3 times like this, and the more we got into it, the more we realized that this sucked. And that this was going to be really expensive, and didn't really have the needs of the cultivator at heart. And a couple of people tried, almost no one succeeded. And because they were wanting to give their money to a different kind of license holder. Than people who were participating in the medical market. And so I had to make a decision at that point, because I wasn't going to be involved with the medical market anymore. and didn't look like I was going to move into the licensed market. So what are we going to do? And it came back to my first love, which was teaching patients, teaching dosing strategies, and creating a safe place for cultivators. And so the initial meetings that we had to learn about regulations became patient outreach meetings. And so they became like, one doctor would come to, well, actually, we're very lucky to have Dr. Ethan Russo.
I was going to say,
the world famous neurologist, lives on the island. He's my neighbor.
Yeah.
And so Dr. Russo, came and talked at one of these events and explained the endocannabinoid system. And everybody's all like, this was very new information for the people. Yeah, right. But also, if you are an event promoter and you're trying to book speakers, if a cannabis doctor, scientist, celebrity, whatever, if they know that you've already hosted Dr. Ethan Russo,
right,
they're figuring that you're pretty okay. And I got all these yeses from international cannabis talent who would come, and I tell them that we're a patient outreach organization. We don't charge any money to attend. We're donation based only. We do not pay our speakers, but we had a sponsorship deal with the one hotel on the island. I said, if you come to the island overnight, we'll put you up for the night. But really, you're just coming because you care about patients and you want to talk to the real deal people.
Yeah. And
people flocked to Vashon. And so suddenly now we've got this scene which grew from Vashon to Seattle to the Pacific Northwest. We've had people fly in from Colorado and from the Bay Area for different events we've had, because the variety of teaching at these events was very down home, good vibe stuff. And so that's where the education of the circle, all the way back around to your question.
Yeah.
That's where the education came in. It was originally, let's organize cultivators because I'm interested in them and I wanted to be helpful on this new island that I called home. And then I saw things that I could do to be of service to them. And so I did those things, which helped my reputation as being somebody who was trustworthy. And then we pivoted that into a patient organization to the point that, I speak here at the senior center a couple times a year, and I'm on the local radio station as a guest regularly, and been on the front page of the newspaper. It's like I've developed this niche for myself where I have been referred to as the weed guy or the pot guy a gazillion times, but not because I was selling bags, right?
Right.
I don't sell flower. It's because I'm teaching everybody and then telling people where they can get the stuff that they need to feel better, whether it's in the rec or unlicensed market. I just, so that brings us, pretty much to where we are now with Vimeo, where, unfortunately we've been on sabbatical because of COVID, right?
Yeah.
And Vimeo will be the last group to get people coming back together because we're all patients, right?
Yep.
And so we are at the most high risk. And also, there are a lot of people in the cannabis scene who are resisting vaccination.
Yeah.
And so I'm certainly not going to be that guy who checks everybody's ID at the door. That's not really how I roll.
Yep.
So we're just going to have to wait. We're going to have to wait until the risk is decreased enough that we can bring together a room of 100 patients and not have it be super dangerous. So, we won't have meetings until, at least spring of 22, which is a bummer, right?
Yeah,
that'll
for sure.
Leave us at a good 2 years. That's going to leave us with a good 2 years without meetings. But got to keep the patients safe.
Exactly. I mean, it's the weird situation we're in. I mean, I felt the same thing. I used to do in-person workshops pretty regularly on cannabis science topics. Was doing guest lectures at universities and everything, and it's been, pretty much once everything kicked off around February, March of 2020, it's like I have a daughter. I also regularly see, my parents who have all sorts of medical conditions, myself and my wife have medical conditions. So we've been basically, just being very strict on in-person events and having to get people together. And it's been interesting because I've had to rely on virtual communication, leaning more on podcasting, leaning more on that sort of thing. But it does feel weird because you like to be with people, and there are these interactions and moments and knowledge sharing that happens in person that's so hard to to get those dynamics captured in a virtual setting. I'm sure you've experienced this, where you see the knowledge sharing, the questions being asked, the looks on people's faces, these different subtleties that come out in in-person events. That's really, really special. At least, those are the kinds of things that lead me to want to do those things more and more, seeing all of that happen. So I can imagine it's been
the hugs.
Yeah.
The hugs, right?
Right.
Like at the, it's like, it's that simple. Like, I live on an island. I'm a single guy. I live in a house by myself on the water, right? But I am not getting enough hugs.
Yeah.
When, at first when COVID came and all the conventions were canceled, I must admit, it was nice to get like 6 months to a year of a travel break, right? Because I had been traveling 2-3 weekends a month to speak at events and to teach and whatever, and that had gotten to be a lot. I was getting tired of being a road warrior all the time.
Yeah.
But I really, really like my national and now international group of cannabis family, like the people I would see at events. And so it was cool to have a break for a while, but now the break has gone longer than I've needed.
Right.
I am, because I'm a high risk patient, because I've got severe asthma. I'm not rushing to go like, MJ Biz is, coming up soon. And I'm certainly not going to that this year. Right. Because I am an at-risk patient, right? But I really wish I was going to an event.
Me too.
I really wish Cultivation Classic in Portland.
Yeah.
That's
I know the autoflowers too.
I skipped that too. And so but I miss those hugs, man. I really miss seeing the cannabis people and being, smiling with them and going outside and toking and walking around and talking with vendors. Like, I really, really miss the extended community. Yeah. And I love my Vashon community too. And I have been very focused on, working on stuff here, but it, it would be nice to go some cool places and do some cool stuff.
Yeah, I totally feel you. Yeah, I'm ready whenever the time is right. And this is a good time to kind of switch a little bit here. We've been talking about how all of this is developed and the work that you've been doing, but I do want to spend some time just talking about, the show, the Curious About Cannabis podcast. I want to talk about what makes you curious about cannabis. And so, I'll just lay out one basic question related to the podcast and then expand on other things. But what are some insights that stand out to you that you've gained from all of the people that you've talked to, over the past 4 years or so on the podcast? What are some notable things that stood out to you that maybe changed your perspective a little bit, or that you just were totally unaware of that kind of blew your mind? But what are some kind of the more significant insights that you've gained from doing Shaping Fire?
Well, one thing for sure would be understanding how different each human's body is. This idea of individualized medicine.
Yeah.
I really kind of thought that cannabis was the same for everybody, and that's like wildly untrue. How people react to different terpene profiles, how people cannabis is biphasic, right? Mm-hmm. Meaning you can take a little bit of THC, which will reduce your anxiety, but if you take beyond your personal threshold, it will cause anxiety, right? Yeah. And because of cannabis's biphasic nature, we all have different thresholds. And so, somebody may get the relief they need with the tiniest little puffy puff, whereas somebody else is going to be like pulling tubes and blowing clouds to get where they need, based on what, how many receptors they have and how busy those receptors are. And so the understanding that each patient needs to be addressed uniquely and without carrying over too many assumptions, that was good for me to learn as a health educator, but it was also good for me for just generally realizing that I should not generalize people entirely. Yeah. To respect each person's individual nature. And I kind of got to that through trying to help people relieve their their body issues,
Yeah.
and just realizing that, everybody's different and on a lot of issues, not just their medicine, and not to assume I know folks. So that was a breakthrough thing for me. Another one was I had no idea I was so interested in soil science.
Yeah.
When I first started cultivating, it was just like take the bag soil, put it in, throw in some kind of nutrients from the store and grow a plant. That's great. But then I started, talking to what would become known as the regenerative scene people, and realizing the magic of all the biological life in the rhizosphere and the protozoa and the microbes and how these folks get along, and how, for me, one of the first things I realized was that, we get cold early in the season, right?
Yeah.
So we've already had, it's like the second week of October, coming into the second week of October now. I've already had 50-degree nights for 4 weeks. And I didn't, until I started learning about soil, that I realized that the soil in the containers were going to sleep. The microbes and everything were cysting up, and then the plants would just go to mold. So it wasn't that, my plants were unhealthy and then I got mold. It's that the soil went to sleep, which signaled to the plant that we're done for the season, and so you should mold for the cycle of life.
Yep.
Well, that was fascinating to me, and so next thing you know, I'm reading everything I can on soil science and regenerative, growing techniques, and creating your own inputs on your own property. And when it comes to Shaping Fire, the guests that I have very much are based on what I'm interested in learning next. And luckily the show's at a point now where everybody takes my call, right? So it's cool. I can reach out to whoever and say, hey, would you come on the show and talk about this thing that I would like to learn about? And everybody's like, yeah, that would be great. And I think that because I don't fake that I know all this stuff before the show, I think the audience digs that, because it's very common for people to say, I like that we're learning so much together.
Yeah.
And because some podcasts, they pretend that they know everything, and they'll even talk over the guest and try to tell the guest story. It's like, I'm much more of a get my mouth. I keep quiet and try to let the guest to tell their truth, and then ask good questions. And then when I learn something, it's common for me to go oh, I never got that before. And this is how you, and then you can almost feel my audience going, oh, me too.
Yes.
Right? And so, I'm not going to front for a second that I know all of this stuff. After doing, 4 years of my own show, and then another 105 episodes before that for Ganjpreneur.com, I've done over 200 episodes, and I've been doing this for 5 years or so. I know a lot now, but I learn new stuff on every episode, because that's why I do those topics, so I can learn.
That's perfect. I mean, and having that lifelong learner mentality, I think is great. I mean, that's something I'm always trying to promote, that regardless of whatever niche you've specialized in that you know a lot about, there's always so much more to learn, and to maintain that curiosity is great.
Keeps us humble too, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It keeps you humble too. Yeah. So as soon as you start, you think you know everything.
Yeah.
Not only will you stop learning, but you'll probably also start being a prick.
Exactly. Yes. That's some of the biggest assholes you'll meet in the industry are those that have a little bit of knowledge that think they know a lot.
Absolutely.
I think that's called the Dunning-Kruger effect or something. There's actually a model for that you can look up. There's a graph. Anyone listening that wants to look it up, you can actually see this theory related to knowledge acquisition and confidence. And when you get a little bit of knowledge, you often overestimate how much you know. When you have a lot of knowledge, you generally underrepresent how much you know, because you've become humbled and recognize that even the things I think I know a lot about, who knows? There's always more rabbit holes and new things to shine light on and everything. And one thing I wanted to make sure that we spent time on, because I know that you're really into regenerative agriculture now, And something we talked about before we started recording that I found really fascinating was that you've been trying to figure out how it might be possible to take, permaculture, regenerative agriculture principles, and take them from the outdoor cultivation environment and find ways to integrate them in the indoor cultivation environment. So before we wrap up, I definitely wanted to make sure to spend some time speaking on that. So I know we've talked about it a little bit already off camera, but can you share a little bit about your recent indoor cultivation foray and what you learned from that experience?
Yeah, so I've got to admit, I have evolved my thinking, and again, another thing that makes one humble.
Yes.
So for years, I have been a proponent of only outdoor. I think that the quality of the medicine that comes out of outdoor plants that are grown under the sun is higher than indoor, because the wider spectrum of light means that we are creating a wider terpene profile, a stronger cannabinoid profile, and just generally the plants thrive better. I understand the appreciation of indoor from its connoisseur level, bag appeal, and beauty, but that's a different topic. I really like the medicinal value of outdoor plants, and I also didn't have a place to grow indoors, and so I was an outdoor guy because that's all I had access to, and I believe the gospel of Northern California outdoor, that's the best way to go. And so that's what I've practiced, and over the years, I have increased my soil knowledge and using natural inputs and, natural farming techniques and KNF. And so I've got a pretty good sense of what I'm doing outdoors now, and keeping my soil alive over the year and using that same thriving soil the following year. So that's great. However, it became important to me to do two things. Number one, I needed new things to explore on the Instagram, the Shaping Fire Instagram. I've got like 11,000 followers, and I'm trying to always provide helpful tidbits.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot harder to do if you're an outdoor grower during the winter.
Yeah.
And I'm like, let's see if I can do this stuff indoors. And so I in this new house that I moved into last year, I've got a little bit of room. So I just set up a simple 4x4 tent. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big fan of letting the plant roots talk to each other.
Yeah.
And so instead of making individualized containers, I set up a really nice 4-foot by 4-foot by 20-inch deep bed.
Nice.
And then I used the layered biomimicry soil technique that that's taught by Leighton Morrison on my show, and so I asked him to get involved to make sure I did the bed right. And I wildcrafted all my inputs,
nice.
Which was a pain in the ass. And it's funny, I highly recommend it for quality of flower, but I don't recommend it for the amount of hassle. I never realized that wildcrafting silt was going to be so damn hard. And so anyway, so I wildcrafted everything for the bed and built it out, and then because in my head, I understand that there are indoors, there's lots of options, right? There's hydro, there's Rockwell cubes, there's all this other kind of stuff, but none of those are really how I do things. I like the Jeff Lowenfeld says, if a worm can't live in it, it's not really a growing medium. And I know that it's up for argument, and I'm not trying to pick a fight with the Rockwell people, but for me, that's where my head is I wanted to use real soil biology because I'm a soil nerd.
Yeah. And
so I started bringing in as many of the techniques that I could find from outdoors, indoors, and did my first run, and I found I found lights that I really liked. I liked their spectrum. I liked the company's philosophy, and that's BIOS lighting.
Mm.
They make really good lights for both humans and for cultivation. They're actually a NASA spin-off company.
Oh, funny.
Their scientists helped develop the LED growing setups for the space station. Which
Ah.
as an odd thing, I actually used to work on the space station.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah, that's a funny thing to mention. I used to live in Colorado for a while in late 90s, and I worked for a technology company there that was making RFID devices for a Space Hub, what was the original name for the space station. And so, stuff that I have touched is, theoretically still up in the space station. So that's cool.
That's
so anyway,
super cool. Yeah.
got off the point, but the first run out of the tent was like the best things I have ever grown in my life. And like I recognize how difficult that is too, as a devout outdoor guy, that I grew this stuff indoor. That is without a doubt the best weed that I had ever grown. And honestly, it was like the top 5 things I had ever even smoked.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
And what I realized was how limited I am by how short and crappy our summers are where I live here in the Pacific Northwest. If you think about it, a simple 8-week flowering period, if the plants start to flower here around August 15th, that's October 15th. We are soaked and cold by October 15th.
Yeah.
So really, we only really get about 5 weeks of growing season before things start going to hell. Then I realized that I'm actually a lot better grower than I thought I was. It was that I was trying to grow well in a poor environment. So as soon as I took those same regenerative techniques and brought them indoors, I hit it out of the ballpark. Well, that made me feel really good, Yeah. 'Cause like year after year of getting beaten down by the bad weather,
right?
You kind of feel like a schmuck, I'm like, someday I'll be decent, I'll just keep on learning and keep on plugging away. And then I grow once indoors, and it's like, holy smokes, and so that made me feel good. And so I'm still torn, right? Because it was really satisfying to me to grow flowers that I could never finish here indoors and have them finish beautifully. Like really finish, not like, oh, it needed 10 more days outdoor, right?
But
like,
we can take it now.
That's what I've been yeah. Well, that stuff's still great to process into tinctures and RSO and stuff like that, but it's not like fun to smoke, you know? Because it's just not there, but the indoor stuff is definitely there. So I'm at this new point now where I am absolutely a lover of outdoor, but because of where I live, I absolutely see the need for indoor. But if I'm going to do indoor, I'm not going to be using bottles and rock wool and A and B formulas and stuff, right? I am going to be using like whole nature soil additives, wild crafted when I can do it responsibly, but otherwise, build a soil, gives out, sells a lot of really great inputs, and get stuff from like there. And then leaving the only real problem for me, the fact that I'm using electricity
right.
for my lights, which, I try to, have a small carbon footprint, and I'm somewhere in between. I use so little electricity in the rest of my life, and my carbon footprint is so small that if I'm going to choose to spend my allotment of electricity on the lights, that's my decision to make.
Yeah.
And so I do that. But even more importantly, I am aggressively researching and continuing to talk to solar people, because I think that when the day comes that we can capture the sun and put it in batteries and have that push enough juice to run LED lights, it will absolutely remake the home grower industry.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And so I believe that time is soon. I don't think it's far away. And so So, am I totally comfortable with, using lights to grow indoors? No. But I picked good LED lights that don't use a lot of electricity. I am producing my own medicine, which I think is legit.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as there is a real opportunity to, you know, teach using solar at home for home grow, I will have that show first.
Yes, yeah.
I will be all into it. So yeah, I'm in this transition place where I am a devout outdoor grower who now has fallen in love with indoor, and I'm like wildly excited about my second cycle coming up here. So
That's super cool. And what did you grow for your for this first round of indoor experimentation?
yeah, before I go into it, people will be like probably shocked that I'm going to name 5 plants. This was part of my learning curve. 5 plants is way too many for a 4x4 tent. So we will definitely tie that up to a learner's error.
That's
'Cause,
right.
I just wanted variety. I wanted to finish 5 different things so I could try 5 different things, but it like overgrew like crazy.
Oh, sure, yeah.
With that, I grew the hot Bickett OG that was bred by Nick Risden at Lime Rising Farm. That's a cross of GMO and cherry pie.
Nice, yeah.
It is an absolutely delightful strain. And then I was given seeds that were bred by my good friend and very popular cannabis guy, Michael Hinden, who died a year ago now. As a matter of fact, I was on my way to pick up these seeds when I found out that he had been murdered the prior day.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like at the airport going down to meet with Leighton Morrison in Southern California, and then we were going to drive over to Hindy's house. And then I found out that he passed, and so there was a lot of grieving there. But then his business partner, widow, Brianna reached out to me, and she said, hey, I knew Michael was going to do this thing with you, and he was going to give you seeds for the patients on Vashon. And I still want to continue on with the things that Michael wanted to do. And so she sent me almost a complete set of the modern epigenetics first release, and they're all runts crosses. And so that became extra special, right?
Yeah,
because
yeah.
not only are these crosses that I was hot to grow, but it was like Michael, right?
Yeah,
this
right.
is Michael's work. And so it became a real labor of love, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And so I grew Michael's Secret Stuff, which is GMO runts, and then also Jet Fuel OG runts called Private Jet. And that's a stinker. That's a really great plant.
Yeah.
The Michael's Secret Stuff is a good plant because I like GMO, but the Jet Fuel OG runts, it was just like nasty and caustic and stony. It's really great. And then the two opposite corners grew a Landrace Acapulco Gold.
Oh wow.
Which was okay. It didn't turn out as nicely as I had hoped it would. It was beautiful. It just didn't have a lot of nose to it.
Yeah.
And then I ran CSI Humboldt's UK cheese Skittles cross.
Oh, nice.
Which is really great. So not UK cheese Skittles, Obama Skittles.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because I've always liked the Obama strain. So anyway, but the funny thing is that Bickett OG is just a monster.
Yeah, right.
You put the Bickett OG in a 4x4 and it turns into a cage fight.
Yeah.
The Bickett like overgrew everything else, and so that was really difficult. So I'm very much excited. I'm going to scrog this next cycle.
Yeah. Nice.
And I think I'm just going to stick to 3 plants, which is probably still more than I should have. But my goal is to grow them and then just weave them back and forth.
Yeah.
And see how that goes. One of the cool things is that like since I'm not cultivating for profit, I'm cultivating for medicine, and so that I have like things to take photographs of to put on the Instagram. I can embrace my screw ups.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
It isn't like, oh, if I did this wrong, I can't pay rent. Well, I'm not using that to pay rent. I pay rent from the advertising on my
Yep.
show, you know?
Yep.
And so I can really embrace my mistakes and go, oh, well, I effed that up, you know?
Right.
And
Let's
then
all
take
learn
pictures
from
of
it.
and then yeah, look at this stupid thing I did, you know, because I was naive or I just didn't have the experience. And so I use those, you know, those things to teach, but very, very much love indoor now. And now I'm like, you know, plotting what plants I'm going to do this cycle after the next cycle after the next cycle. Like, you know, I've got indoor fantasies now.
You've been hooked. Yes.
I have absolutely been hooked, and constantly now. I'm like, even though I don't have any more room in my house other than this 4x4 tent, I'm already thinking, how could I do a whole room? Like, you know, doing two or three plants is great, but I'd really love to do like a full patient card of 15, you know, indoor.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's not where I'm at right now, so that's okay.
We'll see where it goes. And
absolutely.
Have you played around with autoflowers at all?
Oh yeah, well, I fell in love with autoflowers and became a big proponent of them about 3 years ago. As soon as I learned what an autoflower was, by going into the fields in Oregon near you,
nice.
Oregon CBD Seeds.
Oh yeah, nice.
Seth and Eric Crawford, right?
Yep.
Good friends of mine, and so their first auto was a all CBD hemp cultivar called RNA, really nice auto. And when I was there, and they explained to me how they're not dependent on the sun, they're dependent on, you know, their length of light, and then they automatically mature and flower. I'm all like, holy hell, patients everywhere that is not California needs these.
Yeah.
Because so many of the genetics are designed for California weather, and then we don't have California weather in most of the rest of the country. And so the idea that you know, we can start something June 1st and harvest it middle of September when we're all still in drought. That was like, and so I immediately dug into that hard. I started hunting out autoflower breeders and putting them on my show, and hunting out seeds so that I could grow and take pictures and learn myself. And hooked up with Jeff Lowenfels, who put out a book on autoflowers, and told him that when the book came out, I wanted to have him on my show for his first interview. And that was cool. He actually invited me to write something for the jacket. So I'm like
cool.
on the jacket of the book. So that's cool. And as we talked earlier, you know, I did a lot of traveling to teach about cannabis, and I was usually being booked to talk about something patient oriented, right? And so I guess this would have been 3 years ago. I don't know. In COVID days, everything mashes together.
I know. Yeah.
But you know, about a year and a half before we started all the COVID-y stuff, I was just touring, going to conventions and teaching autoflowers, which, you know, historically have a pretty bad reputation because the past seeds have been pretty low yield. They've been pretty weak. But like the new generation of seeds are fantastic. And, you know, they're not going to get to be monster plants that, you know, we all still love. But like most people don't have the weather to grow those monster plants, or at least to finish them, right?
Yeah.
You might be able to grow a monster plant, but are the flowers ever going to finish? Not most places in the country. So anyway, I kind of took the autoflower gospel on the road, and I reached out to lots of autoflower seed companies, and I said, hey, do you want to sponsor my talk? And all it takes for you to sponsor the talk is to send me a box of seeds that I can give away to patients after the talks. And of course, they're like, hell yeah, Shango. And so all these folks sent me seeds. And I asked everybody, hey, will you throw in a couple extra for me so I can grow them and put pictures on Instagram, and I'll send you traffic. And they're like, yeah, we're good with that. So I would go to all these cities and give my talk about autoflowers, and then say, you know, if you are a patient, come up and get a seed pack. If you are not a patient, don't come get a seed pack. Go buy one from one of these seed providers. Go out on the floor and buy them at the show.
Yeah.
But if you consider yourself a legit patient, come get packs. And it was great. Like patients are usually neglected, right?
Yep.
They're, especially at trade shows because they've got no money to spend usually, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so suddenly they're the ones getting the free stuff. And it was like high quality, good seeds. And so that was really good, and it felt good. It's good to be the conduit for that kind of love from the breeders to the patients, and so I'm very grateful that the autoflower community has embraced me, and even though I'm not a breeder, all I want to do is help spread their gospel and why you should buy their seeds. So and I think they get that my heart's in the right place. I'm not trying to take anything from the scene. I just want to make their artistry more popular, and we've done a great job. So that's really great. I am, even though autoflowers still tend to get a lot of flack by a certain kind of grower, I'm really honored to be, one of the people at the forefront of teaching autoflowers.
Absolutely. I mean, it's super fascinating to me for some of the very reasons that have come about in just talking about your experimentation with indoor and everything. Just thinking about how you translate cannabis cultivation to other places other than California and the lower half of Oregon. We have to expand our conceptions of all of these things and recognize, like you said, that everywhere's not California. Having that sort of arid environment and these long, summers and everything, that's not going to be the case. And I mentioned before the interview started that I'm from the Southeast, and so I'm keeping my eyes on, Tennessee, North Carolina, Arkansas, all these places that hemp's starting to get big, so they're jumping into large fields of cannabis cultivation and are recognizing like, oh no, like this doesn't quite translate. Everything I've been reading in all these books and everything, it doesn't quite match up. And so seeing experimentation with autoflowers, I find particularly fascinating from that perspective. How can autoflowering varieties be used in places that typically do get a little more humid, that the rainy seasons start really early, or in places where, you get these cold fronts that come really early. Seeing how that can be a bridge to, especially because as places legalize cannabis, they usually don't let you bring cannabis from other places, other states. Mm-hmm. And so you're stuck with, in whatever state you're in, once it goes medical or, full adult use legal, you've got to work with the climate and situation you have, which is one reason why people often retreat. I say retreat, that's not the best way to put that, but they tend to default back to indoor because they just figure outdoor isn't even an option. So it'll be interesting to see if autoflowers, as they get bred and improved upon, because they've definitely changed a lot since like the 90s. I remember back in the day, like the old like High Times magazines and stuff, you'd start to see advertisements for autoflowers for closet grows, so that the plants would be small enough that you could keep in a little grow box, or people used to grow in like PC cases, that they would outfit to grow plants in. And so seeing autoflowers come from that, kind of early start to where it is now is just really fascinating to see. And it's got me really, especially from a scientific perspective, I'm like, I want to do trials with autoflowers and start to look at the biochemistry of these things and see if we notice any interesting things in some of these genetics that we don't see in other things, because you never know until you look. So that's all fascinating, and something I definitely wanted to check on, because it seems like for a place like Washington, that would definitely be the way to go as far as outdoor cultivation.
For sure. I mean, some of the early autoflowers that I was growing were like 100 days, but this summer I got to grow a bunch of 60 days.
Wow!
60 days.
Wow!
Like,
that's
and they
wild.
were fantastic autoflowers that were 60 days. And, they're not big plants, but, just like when we were talking earlier about individualized medicine for patients, you need individualized genetics for growers.
Yes.
A lot of patients, okay, great. It's wonderful that they could potentially grow a 12-foot plant, but how the hell are they going to take that down? People with mobility issues,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
who are growing in a backyard and they don't want to get their stuff ripped, right?
Yep.
For there are particular growers that growing a 2.5, 3 foot, maybe a 4 foot plant, that's going to stay short. But maybe they grow a few more of them so they have some variety.
Yep.
There are people who don't need the traditional monster plant because that's not what they need. And so in the same way that we talk about individualized medicine, I like to talk about individualized cultivation.
Yeah.
It isn't that one seeds are necessarily better than the other. It is the seed's highest use for that particular cultivator. And I think it's another way that we, as educators, can encourage people to, be in service to, the people that we're trying to educate, whether or not they be, people who identify as patient growers or just home growers or extractors, right? It's all about, being in service, and so that the individual cannabis enthusiast can choose which attributes of our scene work best for them.
Yeah.
It drives me nuts when people compare like growing styles, like how you are growing is wrong. Like, dude, you're talking to this guy on Facebook or Instagram. How do you know any of the details of this person's needs, right? Like person will figure out what works best for themselves. Don't worry about yelling at them that they're an idiot.
Absolutely. I think that kind of goes across the entire industry in general. I think as the industry is like kicking off, and people are much more public with their cannabis usage and growing and everything, you see so much typical human dynamics, bickering and posturing and comparing and everything. And it is important to make that note that everyone has their own relationship and specific situation that they're in, that they're going to find things that work for them. And there are lots of options. And so getting caught up in trying to understand what's best right away is just kind of it's kind of a fool's errand. It's what's best for you is definitely a great message to get out there. I also just glanced at the time, just noticed between our cuts, we've probably gone on for like an hour and a half here. So I want to be respectful of your time. I apologize for not noticing that sooner. But this has been a wonderful conversation, Shango, and I wish we could go on for another hour and a half or two, because especially as we get going here and comparing stories and stuff, there's so much that's popping in my brain, memories and things from the past 10 years or so, that there's so much to learn from where we've come from and where we're going. And I guess the last question I'll pose to you is, what do you hope to see from the future as cannabis? I say the cannabis industry, but when I say the cannabis industry, I really just mean the widespread proliferation and normalization of cannabis, broadly, whether that's in the legal market or home growing or, whatever manifestation that has. But what do you hope to see from the future of the cannabis industry as we move into, the next several years, 5 years or so?
Well, start with the most difficult thing that I would like to see. And I would like to see more states adopt and hold a 1 acre cap like they were supposed to have in California, but then the lobbyists got beaten up so that people are now stacking licenses in California. Because originally there was supposed to be a window of opportunity for small heritage growers and family farms to get well established in the market before the big commoditized cannabis companies were supposed to be able to do anything in California. And effective lobbying by big money totally made that disappear just one night. In the morning it was gone, and no one was willing to talk about how that happened. Yeah. And so I'm hoping that as we see the rise and strengthen of these MSOs, these multi-state operators, which are essentially like, McDonald's for weed, right? Right. That the quality is not what it could be, and it really commodifies the whole thing. I hope that many states learn from the California mistake, and they create situations in their states that is the opposite of what they're doing now, which is trying to beckon these multi-state operators so that they can deal with fewer providers.
Right.
And just make the whole thing easy for themselves, instead of doing the thing that should be done, which is letting small players grow in their state and then exporting those companies into other states that did not do a 1 acre cap. I'm asking a lot in that, I know. But that's the number one thing for me, is I would love to see something happen where the small guy can start to compete more effectively with these MSOs. Second, no surprise, I'm super excited to see the future of autoflowers.
Yes.
And you know, because we're still very early in the process, and so much has happened in such a short amount of time. And now that this is the pool that I'm swimming in more, you know, than photo periods, you know, I still keep my hand in photo periods, but really, I think for the regular home grower and patients, the future is autoflower. And so I'm very excited to see what happens there. And then I'm also excited with the, what do we want to say? Like the standardization of cannabis knowledge, because right now there's still a lot of bro science in the teaching of the endocannabinoid system. And, you know, people thinking they need an indica for this and a sativa for that, when indica and sativa is a false thing. It doesn't even exist in reality.
Right.
It's just shorthand because people aren't educated properly enough. And as you know, prohibition continues to melt away into some kind of normalized thing, I look forward to people more uniformly understanding how cannabis can help them and relieve their symptoms, so that people are doing less trial and error and more, I'm using the best practices that we've already learned and shared.
Yeah.
So I would say those three things are the things that, you know, are three of the things that I'm most excited to see come.
Yeah, I mean, those are huge. You know, that first one you mentioned, I know it's a big ask, but I completely agree, because once again, I mean, I saw similar things happen in Oregon. You know, starting in these labs and getting to know these medical growers and these small farms and small businesses, you get emotionally invested in wanting to see them succeed as the industry is starting to come about. And then when you see them get totally crushed and basically no hope of being able to participate in any way, I mean, it's not just sad. Like, it's wrong. It's just wrong. And so I want to just echo that absolutely, that's something that needs to get more attention as more and more states change their laws. Because I do worry that we're already kind of knee deep in this process of kind of excommunicating all of the folks who got us to this point. Basically, the people that took the risk early on, participating in either straight out black market or gray market areas, that stuck through medical all the way up to recreational, and now are trying to decide what to do to make a living, because, you know, it doesn't seem like growing is going to do it anymore. I'm sad to hear more and more and more of those stories as more time goes on. A lot of people in Oregon, I know lots of great growers that have abandoned growing because the money's just not there anymore. Yeah, I totally feel that. So that one in particular, I just want to make sure people are really thinking about, especially if anyone listening to this has any sway in any of these states that are, you know, currently discussing legislative changes. Yeah, all great things. And, you know, I also want to make sure to give you a chance here in the last few minutes, let everybody know how to find Shaping Fire, the website, social media accounts. It's all fairly easy, because if anyone looks for Shaping Fire, they should find you. But as I'll do
the plugs anyway.
Yeah, do the plugs.
Yeah, the plugs. So the center of the Shaping Fire universe is at shapingfire.com. You can listen to the podcast episodes there. You can sign up for the newsletter there as well. We do cool contests for people who are subscribed to the newsletter, so I recommend that you sign up for that. The at Shaping Fire Instagram is incredibly popular. That's where I do, most of my teaching, both successes and failures, and let you know about some of the stuff I've found in regenerative growing technique or new products that I'm into, whatever. So the Instagram's pretty popular. I also have a personal Instagram at Shango Los that's also got 10,000 followers or whatever, and that's a little bit less about the show and a little bit more about farm tours that I've gone on. Nice. And just like more interesting things about like me as another cannabis enthusiast, that stuff that doesn't necessarily fit the Shaping Fire brand. I also want to plug the Shaping Fire YouTube channel, which is really different because even though there are certainly the audio files from the Shaping Fire podcast are there for you to listen to as well. The reason people love the Shaping Fire YouTube channel is because that's where I post all of my random videos from doing Shaping Fire. So you'll get lots of farm tours, farm tour outtakes. When I go to conventions, everything that I see at the convention, I record all of those speakers and bring them home for people who don't have access to it. The YouTube channel was nothing that I intended to do. It was just that when I got home from traveling, I had all these videos. Where the hell am I going to put them? And so I just started dumping them onto the YouTube channel. And now, there are hundreds of videos there, and we've got 10 or 13,000 subscribers, and I think we just recently hit our 1 millionth viewer. So
nice.
So it's really popular, and so that's kind of fun. And I think that's it. So, but the center of that universe is shapingfire.com, and honestly, if you just put Shaping Fire in Google, you'll find it all.
Yeah.
So, before we go, I also want to thank you, Jason. I absolutely see why you got feedback from people that you and I should talk.
Yeah.
I have enjoyed this interview a great deal, which is not something I can always say when I'm on shows. Yeah. But we do have a similar warm cadence and thoughtful approach to interviewing, and I absolutely see why people suggested that we meet, because I too share your experience of feeling an immediate kinship with you, and we could talk for hours and hours. So hopefully when all this COVID bullshit is done, we can have time to get together and do that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, something I'm planning to do whenever it's safe to do. I'd actually planned to do it the year COVID hit. Was I wanted to hit the road and travel around, meet with a lot of people that I had already been meeting for the podcast and everything, do some on-site, live videos and all of that sort of stuff. And, that came crashing down. And then I was like, okay, maybe 2021 that'll happen. No, it didn't happen again. So we'll see about 2022, but at some point I will be getting on the road and trying to connect with folks and, see.
It'd be great to have you up here for a Vimeo meeting.
Yeah.
Once we restart those, I think you'd really enjoy the vibe scene. Our meetings are even in an old log Grange hall.
Yes. Nice.
It's very old school rural romantic, dude. It's really great.
Yes, no, definitely.
When we start doing those, I'll send you an invitation when we start those back up.
Absolutely. And then, there's definitely when in-person Curious About Cannabis events start getting going again, once again, whenever that happens, I'll definitely be reaching out to you to connect over that kind of stuff too, because I'd love to be able to talk to you again and work with you any way we can. It's been a great pleasure on my end.
Right on. I feel the same way. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Absolutely. All right, everybody that's listening, thanks so much for tuning in, as always. And if you want to learn more about Curious About Cannabis, similarly, if you search for Curious About Cannabis, you'll find us. Our social media tags are all over the place, but Instagram is really the main place to find us, at Curious About Cannabis, and the website cacpodcast.com. And then we also have an app out now, too, where you can kind of stay connected to all of the Curious About Cannabis ecosystem stuff. And you can look for that. Otherwise, everyone out there, as usual, stay curious and take it easy. Bye-bye, everybody.